How is it possible that a concert which has not even entered general sales has already left feelings of betrayal, collective anger, and systemic suspicion among millions of fans? And more disturbingly, how could all of this happen at the most sacred moment for ARMY, just as BTS has finally returned as a complete unit? That question has been hanging in the digital air ever since a simple thread on X exploded like a grenade thrown into the heart of the global fandom, tearing open a veil that had long been whispered about but now lies fully exposed before the public. Tickets for the BTS Erupts World Tour 2026 were already being sold illegally, even before official sales began. At first, nothing seemed out of the ordinary. The pre-sale for BTS's Erupts World Tour 2026 had just opened, marking one of the most anticipated moments in modern pop music history. This was not just another tour. It was BTS's return after their military hiatus, a symbolic reunion carrying immense emotional weight, not only for Korean ARMY but also for fans around the world who had waited for years. A new album scheduled for release on March 20, 2026, was seen as the dawn of a new era, and the Erupts concert was hailed as a cultural event, not merely a music performance. Yet behind that euphoria, something dark began to move, almost inaudibly, before ultimately erupting into a global scandal. That eruption came from a single ARMY account from South Korea, at Samuel_9, which initially appeared to be nothing more than an outpouring of anger. The opening line of the thread was not diplomatic, not wrapped in metaphor, and made no attempt to soothe anyone.
중국 업자들이나 잡아 씹어라.
A crude outburst that loosely translated means, just catch those Chinese scalpers already, damn it. That sentence became the spark, not merely because of its words, but because of the evidence that followed. Dozens of screenshots were presented one by one, showing listings of BTS concert tickets being sold on China-based platforms, complete with details such as dates, seating sections, rows, and even seat numbers. All of it appeared before general public sales were officially scheduled to open on January 24. This is where the sense of oddity began to harden into serious suspicion. How could tickets that had not yet been officially sold already have specific seat numbers? How could a complete tour schedule, covering dozens of cities across 5 continents, already be neatly laid out in a table titled BTS Rejieshun Hui Yuding, as if this were a product ready to be shipped, rather than access that should be fairly contested by fans? In the modern ticketing world, details like rows and seat numbers are not trivial extras. They are proof of access. And access in this context means power. The thread spread at an astonishing speed. Within hours, thousands of likes and reposts flooded the post. Korean ARMY, long known for being vocal yet organized, quickly turned the thread into a central hub of discussion. The official accounts of BigHit Music, HYB, and BTS were repeatedly tagged, as if the public wanted to ensure they could not deflect the issue by claiming ignorance. This was no longer an individual complaint. It was a collective indictment. The narrative was clear. Something was wrong, and all eyes were now fixed on those who held the highest level of control over the system. What made the anger even more intense was the timing. The ARMY membership presale had just taken place via Weverse and Ticketmaster, with virtual queues reportedly reaching over 100,000 people in several major cities. Many ARMY spent hours staring at their screens, hoping the system would not crash, hoping their accounts would not be kicked out, hoping they could secure even a single seat. In that context, seeing evidence that the same tickets were already available in another market felt like a hard slap in the face. This was no longer about being too slow. It was about feeling cheated. The outrage was not only emotional but also rational. ARMY is not a naive fandom new to the concert world. They have a long history of dealing with scalping, bots, and ticketing systems that often favor machines over humans. But the scale of the Erupts tour, spanning more than 79 shows across 34 regions, should have been an opportunity to demonstrate that the industry had learned from past mistakes. Instead of improvement, what emerged were indications that old patterns were repeating themselves, now in an even more organized and transnational form. It was at this point that the name BigHit Music began to be mentioned in a different tone, no longer merely as a creative home that protects its artists and fans, but as an institution being called upon to take responsibility. The agency's silence during the early hours after the thread went viral only amplified suspicion. In a fast-moving digital world, silence is rarely seen as neutral. It is often read as a tacit admission, or at the very least, an unpreparedness to face a crisis. The question then shifted. Was this purely the work of third parties, or was there a flaw in the official system that allowed this leak to happen? For Korean Army, the issue carried an additional emotional layer. BTS is not just a global group. They are a national symbol, a source of cultural pride, and a representation of Korea on the world stage. When tickets to their concert are illegally traded overseas before domestic fans are given a fair chance, the sense of injustice feels multiplied. This is not only about money or concert seats. It is about dignity, about who the system protects, and who is left to struggle on their OWNS hours turned into days. Discussions on X grew increasingly heated. Hashtags related to the BTS World Tour and opposition to ticket scalping began to trend. Personal stories surfaced about ARMY who had saved money for months, about fans who woke up before dawn for pre-sales, about exhaustion mixed with hope. All of those stories are now overshadowed by one large unanswered question. If tickets can leak before they are sold, what else is happening that we do not yet know? At this point, the discussion was no longer filled solely with raw emotion. ARMY began dissecting technical details with an almost academic level of precision. The screenshots shared in the thread did not merely display prices and promises of ready stock. They revealed something far more specific and troubling: a data structure identical to that of official ticketing systems. Columns labeled with dates, sections, rows, and seat numbers appeared neatly organized in Mandarin, as if BTS tickets were nothing more than ordinary logistical commodities, ready to be transferred from one hand to another. For many fans who have purchased tickets for major concerts before, details like these are hard to dispute. This was not speculation. It was visual proof that early access had already occurred. A major question inevitably followed. Access from where? The ARMY membership pre-sale through Weverse and Ticketmaster was supposed to be the first and most tightly controlled gateway. The system was designed to prioritize verified fans, with strict limits on ticket quantities and tight account controls. Yet the reality on the ground painted a far more fragile picture. Virtual queues reaching more than 140,000 people in several cities not only underscored BTS's popularity, but also exposed how vulnerable the system was to bots and mass exploitation. Amid those long queues, many ARMY reported experiences of their accounts suddenly logging out, pages freezing, or tickets vanishing within seconds. Now, with evidence of illegal sales on China-based platforms emerging, all of those complaints seem to fall into a far more disturbing context. Suspicion deepened when attention turned to another access route often overlooked by the public: stadium season ticket holders. In several major cities, such as Las Vegas with Allegiant Stadium, holders of PSLs or season tickets do indeed have early access rights to certain events. In theory, this is a legitimate privilege granted by stadium operators. In practice, however, this pathway often becomes fertile ground for professional scalpers. When such privileges collide with bot accounts, cross-border reseller networks, and minimal oversight, what emerges is no longer an exclusive pre-sale, but a backdoor into a global black market. Within ARMY circles, discussions began to touch on more sensitive territory: the responsibility of BigHit Music and HYB. There were no direct accusations, but the tone of the questions grew increasingly sharp. If their official systems are integrated with global platforms like Ticketmaster, how extensive is the monitoring of suspicious purchasing patterns? Is there real-time auditing of accounts buying tickets in large quantities? And most troubling of all, were the warnings from previous tours truly taken as lessons learned, or were they merely notes forgotten once sales euphoria began? The anger burned hotter because history was not on the industry's side. During previous BTS tours, scalping had already become an old wound that never fully healed. Many ARMY still remember how tickets disappeared within minutes, only to reappear on resale markets at prices soaring far beyond the reach of ordinary fans. The difference this time was the scale. The Arirang World Tour was not just a post-hiatus tour. It was a symbol of both national and global comeback. Failing to protect ticket access at such a crucial moment felt like a betrayal of the fanbase that had endured and waited for years. Meanwhile, international resale markets further inflamed the situation. On platforms such as Vivid Seats or SeatGeek, BTS tickets began appearing at exorbitant prices, even while official pre-sales had not yet fully concluded. This phenomenon created a damaging psychological effect. ARMY who had not secured tickets began to feel cornered, as if the only remaining option was to buy from resellers. This is the core of the scalping business, creating artificial scarcity to force emotional decisions. And when this happens on a global scale, under a name as massive as BTS, the impact is not only financial, but also emotional and cultural. In South Korea, media outlets and fandom communities began linking the issue to broader questions about ethics within the global entertainment industry. BTS has long been positioned as a group close to their fans, built on narratives of openness and respect for ARMY. When tickets to their concerts instead become symbols of systemic injustice, that narrative begins to crack. Many fans started to ask, not with cynicism, but with emotional exhaustion, whether ARMY's voices are still truly heard when international business interests come into play. On the other hand, BigHit music's silence during the early phase of this crisis continued to fuel debate. There was no official statement, no swift clarification, no publicly announced promise of an investigation. In a digital ecosystem that moves by the minute, delayed communication is often interpreted as indifference. Every hour without a response added another layer of suspicion. For ARMY, this was not merely about demanding answers, but about preserving the trust that has long been built between the artists, the agency, and the fans. Perhaps the most troubling aspect of this chapter, however, was the collective realization that the problem does not stand alone. What is happening with tickets for the BTS Erupts World Tour reflects a broader crisis within the global entertainment industry, where technology meant to create convenience is instead frequently manipulated by those with greater resources. In this context, Korean ARMY are no longer speaking only for themselves. They are speaking on behalf of millions of fans worldwide who feel that the system consistently favors the powerful, not the loyal. At this point, one question can no longer be avoided, and in fact feels increasingly resonant precisely because it remains unanswered. How long will BigHit stay silent? In a crisis that moves as fast as the currents of social media, silence is not a neutral space. It is a message in itself. And for Korean ARMY, as well as millions of fans around the world, the agency's silence amid a storm of accusations and visual evidence is beginning to feel more painful than the scandal itself. That silence quickly became a focal point for interpretation. For some fans, it is read as internal shock, a sign that the scale of the problem may be far greater than initially assumed. For others, the silence feels like avoidance, a pause that gives the black market room to continue operating without interruption. In the modern fandom world, where transparency is often marketed as a core value, the absence of official communication instead creates a vacuum that is rapidly filled with speculation, theories, and disappointment. What makes the situation even more emotional is the position of BTS themselves, especially figures like Jungkook, whose name has now been drawn into the narrative of public anger. For ARMY, concerts are not merely entertainment. They are emotional meeting spaces between artists and fans, symbols of a long journey they have taken together. When access to that space is damaged by illegal practices, the sense of loss that emerges is not only about tickets, but about the right to be part of a historic moment. And when the agency that is supposed to protect that experience has yet to provide certainty, the emotional wound cuts even deeper. Pressure has begun to shift from spontaneous outrage toward more structured demands. Hashtags opposing scalping are no longer just emotional outbursts, but collective calls for systemic change. ARMY have started calling for sales audits, the cancellation of tickets proven to have been purchased illegally, and stricter limits on resale. In various countries, fans remind one another not to buy tickets through unofficial channels, even as the temptation is strong and time continues to pass. This is a quiet yet significant form of resistance, refusing to feed a system that harms them. For BigHit Music and HYBE, this situation is a reputational test far more complex than a simple PR crisis. It is a test of values. For years, BTS and their agency have built a narrative of a symbiotic relationship with ARMY, of mutual trust and mutual care. That narrative is now being tested on a global stage. Every decision or lack of decision, will be noted, archived, and remembered by a fandom known for its strong collective memory. The Erupts tour is still predicted to become one of the biggest music events of 2026. Stadiums will remain full, cheers will continue to echo, and BTS will continue to stand as global icons. Yet the shadow of this ticketing crisis will not disappear easily. It will remain an important footnote, a reminder that behind the glitter of the entertainment industry, there are systems that must continue to be questioned and improved. Ultimately, the anger of Korean Army is not an aimless outburst. It is a warning signal, a firm message that modern fandoms are no longer passive, no longer willing to accept injustice as the price of loving an artist. If BigHit chooses to respond with transparency and concrete action, this crisis could become a turning point toward a fairer system. But if silence continues, what is at stake is not only ticket sales but trust, something far more difficult to restore. And that is where this story stands for now, suspended between hope and disappointment, waiting to see whether the voices of millions of ARMY will be answered, or once again drowned out by the noise of an industry that has for too long allowed a shadow market to grow behind the grand stage called a world tour.